When starting a new research project, it is crucial to have a proper design or framework that outlines the steps or sets of rules on how the research is going to be conducted, and which components to include that will help achieve the goals set for the project. In this video, we'll discuss the basics of research design and the setup of the experiment. Let's get started. First of all, what is research design?
The main aim of conducting research is to observe, describe, predict, determine, and explain a phenomenon to provide new knowledge or support an existing one. Researchers are expected to devise and employ tools or methods that will help manage the research process. This involves 1. Identification of gaps in the current literature that need to be resolved. 2. Selection of a theory to guide the research process and methodology. 3. Design of one or more hypotheses to address the research problems or questions. 4. Selection of a suitable data collection and sampling method. 5. Selection of a data analysis method. 6. Definition of the research limitations. 7. Identification of the main contributors in the particular field of research.
With these fundamental steps for the research process in mind, we can design the initial framework that will guide the research process. Your type and topic of research are going to determine the research methodology that you adopt, whether it's qualitative or quantitative research, or a combination of both. Let's review these two methods, their pros and cons, and how they should be applied.
We start with the description of qualitative research. This type of research is mostly applied to study the opinions, case scenarios, or human behaviors in response to some predefined hypothesis. Qualitative methods are often closely associated with assessment tools such as interviews, surveys, focus groups, and individual case studies. Here are some characteristics of this method. Qualitative data analysis is useful when the subject is too complex to be explained with binary answers, and the data cannot be mathematically analyzed. When the budgets are small, sampling the subjects makes projects more viable, but the researcher may need to be present to acquire the data. All data generated is useful, but it can be time and resource consuming. Unexpected results are acceptable, but qualitative data is more open to personal bias and judgment. Remember that the final results should always be objective.
Sometimes the qualitative methods are assumed to be easier or less rigorous than the quantitative ones. However, evidence still suggests that this kind of information can provide a depth of understanding about studied phenomena that cannot be achieved in other ways.
Quantitative research, on the other hand, uses traditional mathematical or statistical methods of data analysis to measure and draw conclusions. One of the major features of quantitative research is that the proposed hypothesis must be proven by mathematical or statistical means. Other characteristics are these. Quantitative methods are the most effective means of accepting or rejecting a hypothesis, but this requires extensive statistical analysis. The arrangement of the data and samples are standardized across many disciplines. A rigorous process must be carefully planned. There must be complete randomization and correct designation of control groups and variables. Quantitative experiments can be time and resource consuming due to the statistical or mathematical analysis that are done to yield the results. The results of the quantitative experiments are believed to be reliable and unbiased when they pass the statistical testing for things such as consistency and validity.
As we saw, each type of research has its own applications and characteristics. Note that the kind of data and the results extracted from any research experiment depend on the design and parameters set at the beginning for testing.
Now let's talk about the setup of the experiment. The experimental setup will guide the process of executing the actual research plan. Experiments are conducted to test or to predict the phenomenon under study or its causes. A well-designed, properly conducted experiment aims to manipulate and control the variables to understand the causal effects. This involves measurements of independent and dependent variables. Done correctly, the well-designed experimental setup typically leads to a reliable outcome. What type of data do the researchers collect and use for research purposes?
Data can be defined in several ways, depending on the purpose for which it is collected and how it would be used. In research, Data is the recorded factual material required by the researchers to validate the research findings. When it comes to conducting research, data represents the set of facts that can be systematically analyzed to generate knowledge. The purpose of collecting data is to run tests and analyses to decide whether to accept or reject the hypotheses.
Furthermore, data can be collected and stored in different formats for research. Therefore, researchers need to make the right choice from the onset because the type of data one chooses will affect the methods of analysis to apply during the rest of the research. In scientific and social research, there are two main categories of data. 1. Qualitative and quantitative data, and 2. Primary and secondary data. Primary or raw data refers to the data sets which are generated or collected by the researchers specifically for this purpose. Secondary data refers to existing data that are made available by other researchers or platforms. Interestingly, we note that researchers can create ideas or even develop new hypotheses by merely looking at or analyzing the data. By controlling the variables in data, the researchers can get a better view of what is going on with the phenomena being studied and then draw conclusions. One of the benefits of data, especially the primary data sets, is that at any point during the research, the investigators can test the information contained in the available data. They may consequently notice that the results are somehow different from what was expected when the experiment was initially designed.
It is essential to keep in mind the following characteristics when handling data for research purposes. Data is always changing. High-quality data is necessary during the research to have high-quality outcomes. Therefore, researchers must understand the kind of research project they are undertaking at the initial stages of the design to choose correctly the type of data required for the series of experiments. Let us review some types of data that are applicable to research projects that require the collection of primary data.
Observational data is captured in real-time settings, making them unique sets of information, for example, survey results and human observations. Experimental data comes from lab instruments or other equipment employed to capture information under controlled conditions. It is highly reproducible but costly to recapture. For example, genetic test and sequence readings. Simulations are generated through studying or testing of models. For simulations, input data is more important than output data for the quality of results. For example, engineering, economic, and climate models. Compiled data is the result of data analysis that can be collected from multiple sources. For example, statistical data analysis and text analysis. Indexed data are fixed, peer-reviewed, and published collections of data sets. They can be references to prove scientific arguments. Examples are lab databanks and census data. Data that is extracted from different sources can be unstructured, semi-structured, or structured, depending on the method for its collection and storage. Let's now consider another critical aspect of data for research purposes, namely adequate storage of the collected data and materials.
The researchers must consider: how will the data be stored securely? Who will have access to the captured information? Which platforms will be used to handle the data, its storage, and access? The Research Ethics Guidebook on Data Storage and Security for the Social Scientist states that data ethics also means planning for unexpected incidents that could occur during the research. Therefore, when dealing with research data storage, the researchers must consider what checks and balances will be put in place to protect the participants' details or information, the researcher's integrity, and the supporting institution in the event of unanticipated incident or loss of data.
In summary, we note that effective data handling and management practices should include: the data should be organized using a suitable system. All the information related to the project should be documented adequately. The research data should be securely stored, preserved, and be accessible. Data must be used only for the purpose for which it was collected. For more information, please access our website. As we see, a carefully designed method for data collection is of vital importance in the research process. Check out the handout on data collection methods to learn more about this topic. Writing Lab offers more information on this subject. To access it, please go to writinglab-tech.com. Resources, handouts, experimental design. Stay tuned for our future productions.